Friedrich Nietzsche went insane, grabbing the neck of a horse and crying uncontrollably. And I bet that wasn't too good for the mental health of the horse either. But was Nietzsche just horsing around when he talked about how great it is to abuse weaker people? Find out next. Did I stop this thing? Now, Nietzsche's Beyond Good and Evil is and was meant to be shocking even in Nietzsche's day. Scholars who defend Nietzsche say he shocks us in order to get us to question our own moral beliefs. Nietzsche finds an older, more primitive human morality than modern ideas about morality. What is shocking is that he then at least suggests to us that the old primitive morality is superior to our own moral code. Frederick Douglass's autobiography, Narrative of the Life of Frederick Douglass, an American Slave, was written and published in 1845, 41 years before Beyond Good and Evil. Mark Twain's Adventures of Tom Sawyer was published in 1876, 10 years before Beyond Good and Evil, and Nietzsche wrote Beyond Good and Evil in 1886. Nietzsche identifies the earlier, more primitive morality as master morality, and contemporary morality as slave morality. Master morality says the good is strength, exploitation, domination, having power over others. Slave morality says the good is altruism, the idea that you should put other people's interests ahead of your own. Moderation, compassion, helping others. Nietzsche says, for example, that both Plato and Aristotle endorse slave morality. As we've seen, Plato has Socrates say, you need reason to guide emotion and desire. In his Nicomachean Ethics, Aristotle claims that the good way to live is moderation. You should shoot for the virtue that is in between the deficiency and the extreme. Nietzsche disdainfully mentions Aristotle's notion of moderation. Nietzsche's main example of slave morality, on the other hand, is Christianity. However, he counts all the philosophical moral theories from the Western liberal tradition as examples of slave morality. So slave morality includes Christianity, but it also includes Plato's view of justice, Aristotle's virtue ethics, utilitarianism, the view that we should do what brings about the greatest happiness for the greatest number, Kant's ethical theory, the view that we should avoid moral inconsistency, only do what we would will others to do, and never use another person as a mere means. Nietzsche suggests to the reader that the old morality was better than the new. Now, over here we see Wotan, the chief god in Norse and Germanic mythology. Look at his Odinist values. Odin and Wotan were just different names for the same god. Strength is better than weakness. Courage is better than cowardice. Joy is better than guilt. Honor is better than dishonor. Freedom is better than slavery. Kinship is better than alienation. Well, and so on and so on. Vigor is better than lifelessness. You get the idea. This is a morality of strength, a kind of the warrior morality. Whereas over on the right, we have the slave morality of Christianity. Blessed are the poor in spirit. Blessed are those who mourn. Blessed are the meek. Blessed are those who hunger and thirst for righteousness. Blessed are the merciful. Jesus' teachings emphasize core virtues like love, humility, and mercy. Love, faith, hope, and charity, giving to others. Why does Nietzsche suggest that the slave morality is worse than master morality? Because master morality is life-affirming, whereas slave morality is life-denying. In other words, slave morality does not fit human beings. I think about the example of shoes. Suppose I see some cute shoes. I say, oh, those are so cute, I gotta have them. But they only have them in size 11, and I wear 11 and a half. but I like them so much I say, oh, I'll get them anyway, I'll be fine. I start to wear them, but I can't wear them. They don't fit me. They hurt my feet. So they just aren't fit for me in the same way that Christian morals and utilitarianism and Kantian ethics and Plato's ideas and Aristotle's Nicomachean ethics, those views just don't fit human beings, Nietzsche thinks. Now, before we play the Nietzsche game, there are 2 points I want to make. These points are to support the softer, less literal interpretation of Nietzsche. It's Christian morality that leads to cruelty, not Nietzsche's morality of the strong, a view most Nietzsche scholars give. A lot of Nietzsche scholars interpret Nietzsche's criticism of Christian ethics as follows. Nietzsche's real criticism of Christian ethics is that it, by suppressing the natural desires of human beings to dominate other people, creates a fake morality. Proponents of Christian morals talk about compassion, loving others, sacrificing themselves for others, but they end up condemning and harming those who are strong. Really, they have envy and hate toward the strong. So the slave morality is dishonest. Examples would be a Christian who is overly harsh toward same-sex marriage and gay people, a Christian who holds lifelong grudges, a Christian who is furious that politicians live like the rich, a Christian who wants to tax the rich and acts as though billionaires have done something evil. And by the way, remember, even though we're using Christianity as the main example here, like Nietzsche does, the truth of the matter is that Nietzsche thinks you get the same problem with all these other ethical theories, the secular views as well, like utilitarianism, Kantian ethics, what Plato had to say, Aristotle had to say. Although it may sound bad that he's talking like this 20 years after the American Civil War, Nietzsche's view is not white supremacist. Traditional African religions that predate slavery are more like the Norse religions than Christianity. They did not endorse the big themes of Christianity. They did not claim weaknesses are strengths, in Nietzsche's view. That's how he sees it. It was when slaves came to America that they learned about and converted to Christianity, the religion of the white owners. So, it was the slave owners of the South, the masters, who held slave morality, and the slaves who originally had master morality. At least one could argue that is how Nietzsche should have seen things, whether or not he actually did. So let's play the Nietzsche game. You will get a question about Nietzsche to think about, ponder, and answer based on a passage from Nietzsche you will find directly beneath the question. I recommend you pause on your device to take time to read the passage and decide your answer. As you read the passage, ask yourself, should you take the Nietzsche passage literally, or should you suppose that Nietzsche is saying what he says in the passage for some non-literal reason? Question 1. Nietzsche and the Trail of Tears. Nietzsche would have agreed with Andrew Jackson's policy of forcibly relocating Indian/Native Americans off of lands Americans wanted for themselves. Use the passage below to consider whether the above sentence is true or false. Pause now to read passage. Question 2. Nietzsche and ethical egoism. The view known as ethical egoism is pro-selfishness. It says that everyone should always do what is in their own self-interest and put their own self-interest above the interests of others. Use the passage below to decide if Nietzsche agrees with ethical egoism. Pause now to read passage. Question 3. Nietzsche and slavery. True or false? Nietzsche would have taken a pro-slavery position regarding the American Civil War, which ended roughly 20 years before he wrote Beyond Good and Evil. Pause now to read passage. Question 4. Nietzsche and compassion. True or false? Nietzsche is against having sympathy for those less fortunate than you. Here's my own view on the matter. Nietzsche was correct that there's an older morality that fits human beings better. But if he thought that morality was better, his view is wrong. The ideals we have about morality now, that Martin Luther King Jr. and Gandhi are moral exemplars, say, are correct. But Nietzsche is right that human beings fail miserably to live up to modern moral ideals. However, the new morality coming up that you all may live to see will be the morality of cyborgs and robots, the morality of artificial intelligence. Maybe their morality will live up to the ideals that we generally fail to live up to. I'm Chris McCord, professor of philosophy at Kirkwood Community College, and this is Bad Philosophy Class Company. Is that what it's called? Kenny, what was the name on that? Good grief.